I never thought about. I would say a lot of what's changed between when I started and now. I do a lot more research and prep um, when I can. Like for instance, last year going to Exotica, I went in blind. There were probably a couple of people that I was familiar with that I wanted to talk to,
Right.
and I just went in and talked and even with say, okay, Carmela Clutch, she was literally like the only person I was aware of. And it wasn't even through your adult work. It was because I saw her in some comedy shorts with, at least at that time, people who were in my algorithm. And
Okay.
I think it was like people up in California, or like I think King Von, a couple other people, and they always cross pollinate with a lot of the skits and stuff they did on YouTube. And I
Right.
saw her in a couple of them. So that prompted me to say, okay, more about that. And then even her career and what little bit of time that I had. And then, of course, the fragrance thing is kind of my stick. So I try to add that in there as well. But that has then morphed because now, like when I went and just going more so the segment ones, I did my best to reach out to people beforehand since I knew I was going. And I did my best to at least try to research um, something about them to ask. Because one of the things I don't like about when people interview adult entertainers, it's all about the adult content. And
hmm
you can only talk so much about that, in my opinion.
hmm
Some people obviously kind of goes to that, but I've seen some podcasts where they ask about, who's the biggest and who's the best. And like, I don't care about those things. I care about who you are as a person.
Right.
And those are the things I try to really highlight. So the segment ones, I try to go on real targeted and I try to be quick. Simply because one, I'm always thinking, look, you're here to make money. This is your time. You're at a booth or what have you. So I try to get in when I can. I try to make each interview as personal as possible to them based on my knowledge. There are some people where I have no knowledge and I'm just like, oh, you know, I'm observant. So I pay attention to what's going on. I see what's going on here or there, or I look them up on Twitter real quick, try to see what I can and base it off of that. Now for the long form interviews, I follow, look, once I get confirmation, I'm following on social media. I am trying to see what you post, what you're about. And I also research and watch other people's interviews if there are any on YouTube to try to learn more. One, to avoid questions that have already been asked, but two, to try to get a better insight for this person. So when I have a conversation with them, it's a bit more unique, excuse me, uh, but also genuine. A lot of times I go in interviews, whether it's an adult performer or not, and I may have 5 or 6 just general questions, and I don't ask any of them because the conversation just goes a certain way. I just try to let people talk, throw out a couple series of questions. We start talking, and I may think of a question based on something they said and go down that rabbit hole. A lot of it is listening, in my opinion, really listening to what the interviewee has to say, and then basing a lot of my questions off of that while still kind of retaining that structure of, okay, I know I want to maybe get to this or this relates to something else. Because there have been interviews I've had where literally we've talked for an hour plus after like I stopped taping. Like it was
hmm
that kind of conversation. Like we could have kept going. 2 or 3 times, literally like I'm glad I was using Skype instead of like Zoom because I would have ran out of time a long time ago. But it's interesting and fun, and I just try to have fun with it as well. I think when and it's funny when I was interviewed Leilani Lay, and I picked up on the fact that she was playing Mortal Kombat. She was so shocked that I even paid attention to that. Like those are the sort of moments
Yeah.
that I'm looking for. Like I do my research. I want to know who you are. I want to understand. I go to Carmela Clutch, the fact that she has a marketing degree. Those like I want like how does that play into what you do now? How does that play into your overall success? Like those are the questions that I want to ask. I don't want to ask when you're working with this company, what actors do you want? Like I could care less about those things. You're
Right.
an anime person. What's your favorite anime? the things that make you human are the things that are most interesting, in my opinion. And that's what I really try to focus on. And I would say it took me a while because I've really only been doing it for like a year.
Right.
Look back because a lot of my interviews started with Exotica last year. I maybe had one with my man Will with his comic company. And that was easy because that's been my man since my freshman year of college. So that's an easy conversation to
Right.
have.
Right.
Um, but then from there, just branching out and really starting to find people to email, connect, and to talk about those things that I love. I love comics. I love gaming. I love style, I love fragrance, and to reach out to those individuals and to pick their brain because there's so many things I'm curious about, and I
Right.
feel like if I'm interested in these things and I'm curious about them, I'm pretty sure most of the people that will watch, if they're curious about the same things, they're wondering the same questions as well. So I really try to put myself in the place of someone who's watching and the questions that I want to ask them if I was in the audience.
So when you do the research in the beginning for yourself, did you have like I mean, you answered my question, but I guess I kind of want more from a more different angle where, you because you said you found more or less like a shtick that works for you as far as like these are the things that I'm interested in, and I'm going to see if
Mhm.
someone else that I can talk with has more or less the same interest, and if not,
Right.
maybe something else that I can pick at and go with that. But when you first started doing your research on the people that you were having on your show, um, what do you think for you was the biggest difference about how you started your research back then to what you're doing now? Because like for me as an example, like when I first did the show, it was strictly just like to talk with people in the film industry or entertainment in general, and I would look at their films and then I would find something about their films and then point that out. But then as time has gone by, it started changing a lot from using the film as a gateway, but in reality, I want to talk to them about these things instead. But
Right.
the film was the gateway to kind of open up the floodgates, if you will. So for me, that's what kind of changed. Then it went completely different too. I'm just going to focus on what I like about them, and if I connect with their work, can I connect with them outside of the like? Then it's evolved from there for me. But for you, on the other hand, again, the question was, what have you noticed about what your research preparation was to where it is now, and what's the biggest difference you've noticed?
I think the biggest part of it for me and how like what's changed it is probably me in understanding how I conduct things and being comfortable in this line. I've never not been scared of opening my mouth and asking questions or being in the forefront, but interviewing was a bit of a different ball game compared to what I've done professionally. I've moderated panels and this and that, so I'm asking those questions, but usually in that regard, professionally speaking, I know these things. I'm in this world. For many of the people that I'm interviewing, outside of the fragrance people, I'm not in those worlds for the most part. So a lot of it was becoming comfortable with how I function as being the person that's interviewing and trying to find a way to get a glimpse into these individuals' perspective worlds as well as themselves also. So it just took me a time to understand my process. So I was like, when I'm on camera, what I do, how do I do it? And for me, research has always been the key for that. So once I realized, okay, how I talk, how I listen, that's where, okay, so I know I'm very much, I allow them to speak and then I kind of go on from that. What would be best for me? Okay, I should have like a base template of questions because there's some interviews where the conversation isn't that free. So I really rely on those questions to kind of draw things out of people. And
Mm.
some people just talk. And it's very easy to kind of go to different places. But much like you, and I would say, especially with, say, the adult star specifically, because I think like with the perfumers and some of the people, I want to talk specifically about that. Like that's what I'm curious about because it's something I'm passionate about. And at least with everybody I've interviewed in that realm, except for maybe George, everybody's just was normal. I put it that way. Like they were very new. Well, George did this for a long time, then stopped, then came back. So George George Zahar has a like 20 plus year history in fragrance and fashion, actually probably 30-year history now, before he relaunched Zahara back in 2018. So he was a bit different because there was there was a pedigree there in that world compared to it. Other people that I've interviewed in that regard, a lot of those individuals are like self-taught perfumers. They are maybe saw something they loved and they got into the business and, you know, maybe focusing on the marketing part. You know, those are the parts of it fascinating because they were normies, put it that way. And I'm like, how did you get to this? And even with the creators, you know, I've been fortunate to talk to many of them. A lot of them are just everyday people who have a dream and are trying to really get their media out into the public and to be consumed and to be enjoyed. And I think that's something we all can relate to, especially as content creators. You know, I always say, look, I don't care if 100,000 people watch, as long as somebody watches and enjoys it and gets something out of it, that's what makes the difference. And I think that aspect of it is something I definitely relate to when I'm talking to a lot of the comic creators as well. Because I think any of us and all of us just, we want our content to be consumed by people who care. And we want to make sure we make quality content in that regard. But I say overall, my key thing has been learning myself, learning how I operate in this space. And for me, that has allowed me, I hope, to become a better interviewer. Some seem to think so, and I'm very appreciative of their kind words and thoughts and accolades they thrust upon me. But I know I can always be better and do better, and I just try to, every interview I try to make it better than the one before.
So then this leads me to the next question. Then when it comes to the research you've done, because I'm curious if for yourself, you've experienced this, I wouldn't say it's like an issue, but maybe like an obstacle, whether it be good or bad. So I'm not sure if maybe if you already answered this before, but I think you said that earlier that you find something you find someone that you seem interested in and want to speak with, and then from there you do some research. So I'm not sure if the research in some cases are well in advance prior to them coming onto the show, or what I mean by that is like more like in the sense of if they say yes, you do your research then, or if you do your research and then you ask them. But in either way you go about it, if you've ever come across something with somebody that you had expressed interest, and let's say you did reach out to them, you start doing your research and you realize maybe it's not as interesting as I thought. Once I started digging in a little deeper about, you know, not necessarily about what I find what they're doing interesting, but just the overall, I guess you could say maybe the personality, not that they're good or bad, just, you know, something that you realize they didn't click with as you just started to discover about their personal interest in whatever the case may be. Or maybe you found something along the way that you realize this is not what I want to talk with them about at all, because I noticed that when I see these interviews, they go this direction when I want to stay in this lane instead. So I'm wondering how I'm going to handle this now, because I've already got this set up and they want to do the interview with me and I'm going to go through with it now. How am I going to handle that? So I'm curious about how, if you come to those obstacles there, one, if you experience it often, or if you've not experienced it often, but you've experienced it seldomly, how do you go about conducting that for yourself? And if you've ever decided, you know what, I'm just going to cancel this interview altogether and not go through with it.
Well, the first part of that, I tend to start doing research once someone says yes, or if I'm working through a PR person, like we set up the schedule. Right. I start doing research, then scouring online, following on social media, seeing on YouTube, is there anything else about them that I can learn about them beforehand. And, you know, depending on the interview, I'll maybe do it a week to a day in advance, depending on my schedule. Right. Especially if it's somebody who there's a lot of content there. If there's a lot of content, especially like interviews on YouTube, then I am very selective about which ones I watch. Because again, especially if I'm dealing with, say, some of the adult entertainers, a lot of those podcasts tend to go in the same lanes. So I've really tried to look for podcasts that may be a bit different, that they aren't going to focus just on that aspect of that individual. The second part of it, with regards to if I don't think I have not found anyone who, once I started digging and done research that I haven't wanted to go forward, there may be things where I may have gone in and say, hey, I wanted, like, these are things I wanted to hit upon once I did research on them. But then say last minute, I was like, oh no, this is what I'm gonna talk about. This is what I really want to like delve into. But that happens more so in the actual interview than I would say in the research phase
Mm.
based on the conversation. But I think I have had, I think like for instance with B York, there was some things like I wanted to talk about with her. But I think I ended up realizing she was on Twitch or started watching her Twitch stream. And then like, no, these are the things I want to talk about with her. So a lot of that stuff I did kind of throw out the window because I'm like, oh, these are the things that I feel like are more interesting. These are the things, and also for me, I, not saying it's intentional, but I try to find things that the individual is going to be excited to talk about as well.
Right.
Because when they're excited to talk about it, it tends to be a better interview, in my opinion. So, and again, a lot of that does happen kind of through happenstance of the conversation, not so much through the research. But no, I've never just said no, I'm not going to interview this person. It's not what I think it's going to be. I mean, I'll push if I have somebody scheduled, if somebody's so gracious enough to give me their time,
Right.
I'm going to take advantage of it. And I just feel like even if it's a lemon, I can make lemonade out of it.
Have you ever actually interviewed anybody during the conversation where you realize that either the conversation isn't going as good as you thought, or maybe you might have picked up on something during the conversation that you realize that maybe this is not all what it seems to be, at least prior to bringing them onto the show? Because
Yes, there.
yeah, because that's what I was gonna say. Because there's something I picked up. I can't remember which interview it was. I'm not gonna say it here, but I'm trying to remember now. But I'm wondering about how you conduct yourself in that moment, the first time, possibly the second time, but then what you do after the fact. If you talk to the guest after you're done recording, how do you conduct that conversation after the fact, knowing that some red flags I'm picking up here, and I'm not too comfortable now that I know things are not in the up and up, if you will.
Right. There are one or two that come to mind. One that sticks out, I feel like was probably, I'll say my worst interview. I pulled through it, but it wasn't as engaging as I thought it would be,
Mm.
based on the individual I was speaking to and even the subject matter we got to. Um, I don't know. I try to be professional. I thank them for their time. I usually like once we're done, um, I thank them, I appreciate them. And, I let them know, hey, this is how I roll. It'll be up, pretty much within the next couple of days. I do all my social media stuff. I'm real
Cordial.
cordial about it
Yeah.
in the end. Even if I realize that, okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So and luckily I've been fortunate, like those interviews have not been, and again, they haven't been horrible, but they pale into comparison to some of my other ones where just like we're talking the whole time, like literally I have to cut them off, like stop, because we'll be here another 45 minutes just talking, and people got things to do, I got things to do. And also I'm very cognizant of just videos as well. And like, okay, I want to have this a certain time frame as far as the interview, no more than 35 to 45 minutes at the most, sometimes a little bit longer. Or even now, one of the things I've done where when I see that we're having a really good conversation, I've now been doing like with Suki Sin and Leilani Lee, I just did two separate drops with them and try to switch it up on the second one with them asking me questions, because
Yeah.
that's one of the things when we're really having a back and forth, they want to ask questions as well. And that's something that I picked up early on with a couple other ones where I was talking to people and like a conversation just keeps going and going and going and going. And it's like they're asking me questions, especially like about this, like, how'd you get in this? Like, why are you doing this? Like, this is like really cool. So when it's going like that, and luckily the last couple ones I've done, I've gone like that. I've like stopped. Hey, I should say this. Now I say, hey, if it's really, going a certain way, if you don't mind, do another segment afterwards, blah, 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 blah. So it's full discretion of, okay, if I ain't feeling it, we ain't doing the second segment, so to speak. So that's a kind of a buffer there in that regard. But it's definitely, I won't say awkward because I've never felt awkward, but there is a definite difference when it's a so-so interview compared to when it's a really good interview and the individual is just really engaged in the conversation.
So you talked about you have like a cap in mind about the time frame you have for the
Mhm.
conversation. So for someone like myself, um, I like to take advantage in having, especially for someone that's that has a lot to offer in terms of the conversation, the matters we can get
Right.
into. I would like to go as long as I can, if it's absolutely possible. Um, but did you have that in mind already about wanting to do it for a certain length of time about what you want to talk with them about, despite where it may go? But it's got to be done by this time. I know you said you have a busy schedule, and they may as well too. But I just wonder if that was the initial thought process that there's a cap, and then I'm going to stick with this, and then eventually you notice, okay, things I can wiggle around these things, and therefore I'll go for an hour this time around. Where the next time we'll probably split it in two to kind of expand a little bit further out for whatever else we want to get into.
Well, part of that comes from, at least with some of the people I have to book and going through PR, I try to give them our segments or our time frames based on people's schedules. So that's part of where part of that comes from, at least with those individuals. Others, it it's not so much of like I'm cognizant of that because like I want to cut off, but sometimes the conversation just like it kind of goes to that point, naturally speaking, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what I've been accustomed to. And then I guess the third part of that is, and this is my own personal preference. I listen to several podcasts. I know how hard it is to consume content when like your favorite show or podcast is like an hour and a half long, and then you have 5 or 6 shows that are hour and a half long. It is very difficult to try to consume those, at least for me, in a weekly basis. Like there are many, like for instance, I'll give an example. I'm a big techie, always have been. One of the podcasts I used to watch, listen to all the time was Windows Weekly. Absolutely loved it. I'm not in the mind to sit and listen to an hour and a half, 2 hour podcast about Windows anymore. As much as I love the host and enjoy the content, that's a long time to be listening to a podcast about Windows and Microsoft and computing as much as I enjoy it. So for me, I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking like in many respects, like a television program. Most television programs,
Interesting.
hour-long programs are with commercials, without commercials, about 45 minutes or so. If somebody can sit and watch that, and I'm thinking more so the video portion. Audio is a bit different. Audio, I've gone longer because audio is audio. But video, I'm thinking of somebody watching television program because essentially we are for free in some respects creating television programming. Many people are watching this on their televisions, on their mobile devices. And I do think about what the attention span is. I know I will sit there and watch some of the people that I enjoy because of the conversation and everything for an hour and a half. Uh, but I know everybody's not like that. Everybody wants to get in, watch what they want to watch, and move on to the next one. So I try to think of it in the context of a TV program, at least with the video portion. So while that wasn't necessarily my focus when I started or my thought process when I started, now I am thinking, okay, that time frame is something that if we go over that, then we just do 2 segments. But for the most part, I'm looking for that hour because I felt like that was the sweet spot as far as okay, if it's longer than an hour television program, we might lose people. And even I'm sure especially with your content, only a small amount watch everything from beginning to end.
Yeah.
You have some people who watch half hour, 15 minutes,
Mm.
whatever it is. So I am very cognizant of that, at least from the production and maybe not so much when I'm recording, but from the production. And I'm always very cognizant of that time mark and like, okay, I want to do this. Also, just personally speaking, it is easier to fit in an hour with someone during the course of an evening than it is doing an hour and a half, 2 hours. Uh, and I think partially the audio podcast that I do, that tends to go longer because it's usually just me. I don't have too many guests on the audio version. If there's a guest, it's audio or a video I've done. But when it was just me talking, it's just me. It's a lot easier to schedule or do a podcast in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping, because I just happen to wake up at 4 a.m. and I can sit there for an hour and a half in the guest room talking to the microphone. But when it comes to video content, that production wise, again, I wasn't necessarily thinking about it as before, but I am thinking about that length as far as what's on YouTube. And then when I'm working with other people in their schedules, an hour is really that sweet spot. And even then, especially I'm going through publicists, I'll say that, I'll block off the hour, but I'll literally say, look, realistically, we're going 25 to 45 minutes at the most with these conversations. And with that, I try to be very cognizant of people's time, because I know that there are a lot of things going on, and I don't know how people are and they're shooting. Like, there was one actress that I interviewed when she was in the States, and I know she was literally booked back to back to back with shoots because she was from Canada. So a lot of companies were trying to get her while she was there. So getting an hour in was, I won't say difficult, but I was very grateful for being squeezed in, considering that, knowing that she probably has a shoot later on that day or in the morning or something like that, and she's tired or what have you. So in that regard, I'm also thinking about people's times and not taking too much of it, especially when, hey, here's an hour. If they give me more, that's great. But I try to be respectful of people's time at the end of the day.
Do you prefer to have a longer conversation if given the opportunity? Because like one thing I've discovered for myself in doing this, because it's one thing that I've listened to several interview podcasts that have lengthy episodes, and some I've very few, you're 100% right, I've listened to in its entirety because I found one thing or the one person they're going to have on the show really, really interesting, and I'm curious to see what they're going to pull out of them. But then there are times too, I remember one person I'm going to say that I was very, very keen on speaking with, and it took a long time to get him on the show. And when I finally got him on the show, I don't recall we had a set time frame. I think she may have said, we can go for as long as, for as long as we want. I don't remember, but I had Alexandra West on the show, and I kind of thought we were going to go at least an hour and a half, but we went full 3 hours all the way through. And it was one of my favorite conversations I've ever had, because it was, like you said, you start off with one topic, and it was still consistent with the topics that we're getting into, but it leads into different angles of the conversation, and then different parts of areas that I was not familiar with at all that she was able to indulge me with. Right. And I look back at that conversation, and I thought what I went through there was one of the best experiences I've had in a conversation. I want more of that.
Right.
And then I had that again with few other guests, and and what's interesting for me is that because I have the time to do that, you can start, at least for me, I can start picking apart about, okay, so I noticed the wavelengths of the conversation, where the person responds here, how they react to this and that. I'm not an expert at like reading people's body language. I'm not, but I've done this enough to understand, like, I see they respond to certain things better than others.
Right.
And then I'm able to focus on things that I think are much more interesting, or I'll take the chance of, like, I'm just going to ask this question and see what comes out of it. And thankfully, it's always, for the most part, it's always been pretty good, I would say. But the reason I'm pointing this out for myself and relating it to you is because you have a more or less a structure with a certain time frame that you are mostly accustomed with. If you are given the opportunity where someone says, however long you need me for, the rest of the evenings I'm free, or the afternoon I'm free, and if you have that time as well too, do you think that you would still have it in your head to stick with that that set time frame because you've been accustomed to it, or do you think you'll be able to expand on it further? Like, now that I have the freedom to go far out, I'm going to take full advantage of it, because I'm curious about when you do something for so long in that capacity. Do you think it'll be hard for you to step out of that and then go something in a different direction where you have more room to delve into things that you probably would have done in split interviews, but now you have a whole interview dedicated to the amount of time they're offering to you? Do you think you would be able to take full advantage of that?
I I would say yes, but for me, I think it would depend on the individual.
Right.
Definitely, there are like Avery Jane. Like if I would have kept the camera rolling, that would have been a 3 hour interview, like
Mhm.
straight up. Uh, Sabernice, the pinup, like we talked for another hour and a half afterwards. Like Lonnie
But why
Lay,
didn't you? Why didn't you decide to keep that interview going? Like, so if you talk with them for that allotted time, and then you had an additional hour and a half. I mean, did you ever think, at least during that part of the conversation when it's not being recorded, that, you know what, do you mind if we just pick up and record from here because this is great?
I did. I think with Sabernice, I did get a little bit more with her, but it wasn't like 20 minutes or so.
Right.
With Avery, we were just so into the conversation. It was we were like two friends having fun in that
Okay, I see what
regard.
you're saying. Yeah.
And I kind of thought about it after the fact, but just with it was in that case, and this is my opinion. Considering, let me put it this way, I think because of individuals in that field, and I've only interviewed one guy, and that was this weekend. I hope to interview him like long form because he was really cool, and I really enjoyed talking to him. But I think that there's an appreciation for not treating them as just what they do.
Right.
And there was especially for Avery. And at that time when I interviewed her, she'd like taken some months off from the industry, was literally just coming back. And she had really dealt a lot with just the pressures of the industry and what she was feeling as a black woman, and a lot of the stuff with whatever. I'm not saying whatever they go through is to dismiss it, but that's not a situation I'm in. So I can't, I really don't understand. Because I'm not in the industry, I'm not a woman, I'm a black woman, no idea. But she had taken time off to really deal with a lot of the mental stress that she was under. So she was literally just coming back. And Avi is very vocal about how she feels and what she's been through. So initially I started talking about that because I never like I met her once at Exotica last year, and but you know you can't help feel for people whatever they're going through,
Mhm.
and so we started talking about that. She was very open and candid about that, and I think for at least in that dynamic, showing genuine caring as a human being and showing genuine caring to her as a human being outside of just um a big boobas and a behind, as which many people do when they speak to individuals in the adult industry. I think that just opened up a lot more conversation. And then by the time we're done, we were just talking as like two people we know each other for years about different things and kind of things we thought were cool and this and that. So I didn't think of turning on the camera, at least initially, turning back on. With Leilani, we had started getting to maybe some more headier conversations,
Mhm.
or at least they were brought up as we closed. And we were like, oh, we need to do this again because how can I put it this way? And I'll say this publicly. Um, I have nothing wrong with anyone, anybody, what they do. Look, people do you.
Right.
Um, I was not sure how interviewing Leilani would go, not from an aspect of her as an individual, but I wasn't sure personally how comfortable I would be with some subject matter. Because my own opinion is my own opinion, and I
Right.
try not to interject my own opinion in certain things when it comes to an interview
Right.
with someone else. If we just talking, that's one thing. So so that was my only concern with that, especially her being a transgender woman. Like I don't want to
Right.
put any of my opinions out there because one is not me and how I feel in my viewpoints and blah yada
But what if she
yada.
had asked you though about some opinions on certain things that you probably would have been uncomfortable in bringing up? Would you do you think you would have done it if she had asked you during those recording sessions?
Well, I didn't. You know what? I didn't have to because
Right.
she picked up on the fact that I was, I guess, very open-minded.
Right.
And even I said in our conversation, like personally speaking, I have professional experience with people who transition pretty much in every major job I've had out of grad school, and that's since 2005. So it's not like I didn't know and I wasn't aware. I've never been exposed to anyone that had transitioned from male to female, because I have many bodies transitioned from female to male. But so that wasn't in, like, but I didn't have to say anything because she already knew I was very open, and I have no issues disclosing like that aspect of it. So, like, yeah, like I've had conversations, I've asked questions, I've learned things from people that I did not know, because I'm not transitioning anything. I don't like, I tried to understand
their perspective and
yeah,
their point
exactly.
of view. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that part of it, like, I wasn't sure how that was going to go, because people are different. People are different in their standpoints and how they bring things up. And she was very eloquent and she was a very good conversation. And even there was some things like she wanted to bring up certain things that she thought of after we finished to maybe talk about again about that whole thing. And I'm like, oh, I think that'd be very good conversation. So even with her, much like Avery, there was very much a conversation there. It changed from an interview to really being a conversation. And I think for me, that's when I feel like I really could see this what I'm doing, where the structure kind of leaves and we are just two people talking. And I'm leading the conversation where we go from one thing to the next instead of just it being so rigid. And you're right. When I think now, especially now, I have that mindset as far as, okay, I'm going to get it, all of this. If the conversation does go longer, where I feel like they have more time and they want to keep talking, I'm going to keep them talking instead of holding to that regiment. So it's I say with each person it's a dance.
Right. Well, so then let me ask you about this here, because one thing that whenever I ask people, unless I know the person well enough now to the point where I can get past more or less the formalities.
Mm-hmm.
But because essentially for me, in the initial process, so I hope when I'm bringing myself into, I'm not trying to put myself out there like that as the focus on the conversation, but I'm using myself as an example, because when I have asked people in the beginning, it was a certain mind frame of like, I'm going to do an interview.
Mm-hmm.
As time has gone by, it became, it really is a conversation at the end of the day. But I think I stuck with the formalities of like, I would like to have an interview because I just don't want to say, hey, I want to have a conversation with you on my show. And because they may be misconstrued and may look at it, I have no idea how they're going to look at it. Some now, say, hey, want to converse? Like, yeah, sure, let's come on back. And so we've already got that established. But when you start to do the interviews now, especially now, you brought up with Avery and who did you say was
Leilani?
Leilani, thank you.
Yeah,
I forgot. As far as I forgot the name. But when you're having the conversation with them in more or less in private, and you see that the conversation, do you feel like there's a major difference from recording and then not recording, where the momentum during the recording session, I'm not saying was different in a way like that the private conversation was better. That's not what I'm referring to, but more in the sense that the momentum you had in that recorded session and then what you guys had not recording. I'm wondering if you ever felt like this conversation is actually a little bit better than what we did recording. Good conversation, but I like this one better. I would love to record this one over that one.
Thinking back, I could probably say that about Avery Jane. I definitely I think what was taped and was there was a good interview.
Right.
But what happened afterwards was a great conversation.
Right.
And I can definitely see how maybe the conversation, and again, I think the interview was really good. I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was very engaging. I think that if I was watching it, I would be very engaged to hear what she had to say and hear her perspective.
Right.
But the conversation was fun. Not saying the interview wasn't, but the conversation was fun with Leilani. As the interview was fun, because I think especially Avery was, probably one of my first longer interviews, like her and
Yeah, that was like
as
about
well
an
as
hour and 10 minutes right now, something like that, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, in general, as far as like getting those people and sitting down, like she's like my third or fourth, maybe. So even then, I was still finding myself in this whole structure and how to do things. By the time I get to say Lailani Iwasuki, because those are like my two most recent ones,
Mhm.
it was straight conversation, in my opinion. Like the interview itself really felt like a conversation, especially, or even with B York, but especially with Leilani, once we got on Star Trek, it was over.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing
Yeah, so
just shifted, and we just get two people geeking out. So I think for me, I'm a bit more cognizant of that now. But the original question, yeah, definitely the conversation that was Avery was a lot more fun than the interview with Avery that was actually taped and put out to the general public.
So going through those experiences, especially with those two conversations, do you like do you approach it more differently now for yourself? Where it's one thing to say I want to do an interview because you obviously you're asking questions, but I
Mhm.
mean, do you have the mindset of like I'm aiming to just have a conversation? Like I want to talk with them. I don't want to just say, tell me what it was like working on this set here, because like I personally hate
Yeah,
that. I don't like. I'm not interested in that at all. Nor do I really like asking that as well too.
right.
But when you're going about the conversation, like I've learned for myself when we're not recording with the guests that I've
Mhm.
had on the show after the best stuff comes out of there. And sometimes you can't
Right,
reveal for obvious reasons, but
right.
the things that do occur after the fact, like I'm like, I wish we can capture these moments, maybe removing some personal details, but
Mhm.
capturing that momentum there. Do you aim for that now after you've had those experiences on camera every single time, or you just kind of play it by ear, let's see which way it goes, which way
I
this conversation will go to get to that point?
I would say both. I do play it
Okay.
by ear, but I do maybe subconsciously aim for that because I try not to be as serious as when I started. I try to
Yeah,
be less
I did notice that.
rigid
Yeah.
um than I was. I try to have a bit more fun with a bit more loose with it. I think before, especially again, I was very serious.
Yeah.
And some of my questions, like they were serious questions again,
Yeah.
like with going back with Carmela, the whole marketing thing, like that fascinated me. And I really wanted to understand, okay, how does this professional background you have, this scholastic background you have, play into what you're doing in the adult industry as far as your branding, more like that's a serious question, but that
Right.
fascinated me. Uh, so some of those people, like again, Avery, Carmela, particularly, because one, I think because I had met them before, so I won't say as a personal connection, but like I had conversed with Carmela behind the scenes
You've already
since
established,
I
that
met her. Yeah,
relationship.
like there was an
Yeah.
established relationship there. So, and especially considering both of them, Avery with what she'd gone through before I interviewed her, and then Carmela as well with me being fascinated by her background. Like those I know started out very serious because they were, I won't say serious like, but like there were serious things I wanted to ask about them based on what's been going on and what had been going on and who they were. And obviously there were so lighter moments in those as well.
Right.
Um, but now I think a lot of people, because those major questions aren't there, it's a lot less serious in tone as far as how I talk, even thinking about with Jessica. Like I'm leading off with like, yeah, oh, you're from Toronto. Like I went to Toronto when I was in high school for a band competition. Like there's Wonderland still exists.
Yeah.
Those sort of more personal things instead of like, so how long you been in the industry? How long you been doing this? How like that's where I really was before. Now
Yeah.
it's okay. I can look that up. I don't need to ask them these questions,
Yeah.
or I can do this. Some of that does go to research as well. If I can look it up and find it out, I don't have to ask them that, but I can weave that into the conversation. I'll say, for instance, with talk to Jenna Fox when I was at Exotica. And one of the things I asked, and I asked her, and there was someone else I wanted to talk to who I didn't get a chance to. But even when I talked to Missy Stone back in Jersey, like all of them have been in 10 plus years.
Right.
And you and I both men of a certain age. You know stories. People in that industry, especially back in the 80s, 90s, you crashed out like 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that you have performers that are lasting 5, 10, 15, 20 years. In some cases, some are still around since the 80s and is still
Yeah.
working. Like that longevity is unprecedented in that field. So that was my question. Like, what do you attribute this to? Like, because I'm curious. Like, you're on the other side. Like, I'm pretty sure, 10 years doing whatever can pass just like that. Why do you think you've been around 10 years? What it is about what you're doing that has, and like, you can't do something like this without growing your fan base
Right.
for 10 years. So like, that's something that was intriguing to me as a passerby. Like, oh, really? She's been in since 2014. Like, really? 10 years? Like, well, like, even like talking to Missy Stone, and I really like, even like some of my friends who like, yo, like, really, Misty Stone? Wow. And I'm sitting there thinking, I felt like Misty had been around since I was an undergrad. And no, she's only been around like since, and not saying only, but like she's been around almost 20 years. Like my undergrad is more than 25 years ago. And it's like, she's someone who seemed like she's been around for so long. Like, these are the questions, like, I don't know about them. I want to know why, like, what makes them tick in that regard. And with that, I try not to be serious about it, because I feel like I get a better response now than maybe a year or so ago. And also, going back to the originally, it's about finding what's best for me to operate, how best for me to conduct my review. But also, this is a platform where we are looking to engage people. So you have to be engaging as well.
Right. What do you think the one thing that you so when you have an interview with, I'll refer to the conversation. When you're having a conversation with somebody, do you ever think about the questions you've asked during the conversation and thought either it wasn't a very good question that I just asked, even though they were great, but I don't feel like I've asked really great questions, or maybe I've asked a question that I thought would be interesting, but once I've asked it, it wasn't, and or maybe you thought about something on the spot and made you realize that whatever you had asked, which was not intentional, was the best thing you had asked in that moment for that person you're speaking with. And then you realize, okay, so from now on, I'm going to change this approach differently from what I did before, from understanding how, because when you do something for such a long period of time, I've gotten to the habit of like sticking with that format until something catches me off guard, and it makes me realize that I need to change some things along the way too. And sometimes it can be the most unnoticeable thing until you notice, if that makes any sense. So I'm wondering for you, if you've had those experiences for yourself after the fact and made you realize that what worked and what didn't work for you at the moment that you thought would work, then you realize I'm going to change it to approach it more differently moving forward.
Yeah, I would say definitely there are questions I've asked that I thought were interesting that I did not get the sort of in-depth responses I thought I would. So that definitely
Give me an
makes you
example of
pivot.
one that you thought that you were going to get a good response. I'm curious about what that one would be for you.
I think when I was talking to Jessica, and I felt like the gaming questions would go I felt like that would go more in depth. Like she talked about Baldur's Gate and everything, but based on what I knew, I felt like there would be more there, and it wasn't. And again, that's just what she said. And in my mind, I thought, oh, this could go down a rabbit hole to something else, and it just didn't go there. So that's one thing that definitely sparks my memory. As far as the second, I guess this is third part of the question, I definitely try to learn from each interview. I definitely try to learn what works, what doesn't work. I rewatch my interviews as well, because I try to pay attention to maybe facial expressions from the interviewee, how I do things, how I ask questions. Now, I'm not sitting there like with pen and pad or nothing, but I do
Yeah.
sit and watch it just to see,
Mental notes, more or less, right?
yeah, mental
Yeah.
notes,
Yeah.
more or less. And that does, I can't say I go into the next interview with a conscious mindset of, okay, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do that different. But I think subconsciously is definitely a point where, okay, I want to make these changes. I think a lot of that bears fruit in the research phase, not so much the questions that I'm writing down kind of a template, but even how I'm looking at the individual. Okay, what does the individual do? What's there? What can I really understand about them before I go in? Because honestly, I don't want to have to like ask any of my pre-done questions. Typically I like to only ask the first one and then we just kind of roll with the punches afterwards. I would say, for instance, Suki Sen, she was very new, so there really wasn't a lot to go on. Like, she has her own YouTube channel, so she hasn't asked me anything, but again, there wasn't a lot to really research about her outside of basic, how long she's been in the business, what her ethnicity is, how she got in the business, you know, things are on her YouTube page. So for me, a lot of it was listening and then using some of that knowledge, but crafting new questions based on her responses. And she seemed to really enjoy that because she had a lot of fun talking to me and then ultimately asking me questions
Yeah, that was a good
and
interview. I
learning
like that
more
one.
about what I did. So that I would say that was probably initially in the research phase more difficult because there wasn't a lot on her to really go off of. But I think because of that, it made a really good conversation
More
because
spontaneous,
of
you
it.
think?
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely more
Yeah.
spontaneous.
Do you have any um I'm not gonna say regrets, but more in the sense of like, do you have anything you look back on, you thought to yourself that um you did not like what you did at all, as far as whether, I'm not talking about a person you spoke with, but just how
Mhm.
you felt like you handled a certain situation that when you look back at, probably would make you cringe a little bit, or it to the point where I don't want to see this again because it's not as good as I thought it was, or maybe it was a situation where you remember the scenario, but seeing it again made you realize that there's a certain sentiment you had that, again, not make you regret it, but just more in a sense like just you're just not fond of it, like you probably would have been before, or maybe not at all, but now you more or less confirmed it upon revisiting it again.
I can't say that anything particular. I just think that for me personally, and I think about this with regards to video content I produce as well as the audio content I produce. It's very much a learning experience. So even
Yeah.
if I go back and look at earlier stuff, like I listen to my podcast, like the now I did a podcast back in 2014, 2013, 2014 or so. And that was very much off the cuff, off the fly, stopped and came back with Sartorian Geek back in 2019. But even then there was no structure. Like I was so sporadic. And with the pandemic, I told myself I'm going to do it weekly. And for the most part, since about March of 2020, it's been weekly. There's some breaks like this week. I don't think I'm putting out an episode simply because I'm tired. I'm tired and yeah. I'm tired. And I had all that video when I all that video and stuff from Exotica put out. But I say all that to say the constant work I put in to make it weekly allowed me to find my voice and structure of how I want to do things and what was best for me to be most effective in communicating what I wanted to. So I don't look back and say, oh, that was kind of cringy. I look at it and say, okay, that was a learning experience with me growing into the creator that I am. And even with the video as well, I think back on with Will, like Will, that was easy because that's my man. I was in his wedding, like he was in my wedding. I've known him literally since my first couple of days at UMES. So that conversation was easy, and I'd never approached it like, well, I never approached it as if I'm interviewing him, like I'm talking to my friend. And I think that for me, I had to learn to incorporate some of that perspective and mentality when I'm doing other interviews. Because again, like when I talked to Avery, like when I talked to Camilla, I approached it very professionally. I wasn't talking to them as if they were my friend. Others like and I'm butchering her name, Savronique, and I forget her name. Like I talked to her just, and part of that was the initial conversation we had before we started taping. So it became very much of two friends talking instead of me interviewing her. And that was, again, somewhat different than how some of the other interviews have gone, especially when I've had to schedule them through PR people. But a lot of it is learning and seeing, okay, this is what I didn't, this is how I could be better. So no, answer your question. No, there's nothing I say that, oh, I regret that, or oh, regret coming off that way. But I do regret at times maybe being too rigid with the conversation,
Right.
In the past. And again, that's just growing pains and learning what's best for me and my style.
What's one interview or I'm gonna stay with conversation. What's one conversation you had with somebody that really had a major impact on you, like for the better, if you will, that that made you look at things a little bit more different, whether it be about yourself, certain fields that they may be in, life in general, anything that made you like really take the time to self-reflect on something that had from that conversation that really impacted you?
My interview with Sean Crenshaw from Ovation Fragrances, uh, I think partially because he is someone whom I've admired from afar as someone into fragrances, being a Black-owned fragrance, but more importantly, seeing his hustle, and seeing how the brand has evolved since I think I bought my first bottle in 2018. Over the past 5 or 6 years, whenever they came, it was pretty, I won't say new, but it was early on when I purchased a bottle from them. So it was nice. And we had talked in through DMs over the years, nothing like super duper. Well, I'm saying, no, let me back up. Him and George Sahara. Because these were both men that I admired. These are both men that I was in awe of, for what they were doing in their respective fields and the tenacity they had. So both of those conversations with Sean, it was more or less, I loved his hustle. I got a sense of what I was doing mattered, if that made sense. As far as the content I was putting out and the overall message and image I was putting out was definitely mattering and making a difference. And for some of those things he said to me personally, directly, like in that stream about what I was doing, Webster Style, and it was funny because I'd heard that echo before, but kind of outside
the industry
interviews. Yeah, just people I met, and it's like, no, people are paying attention to what you're doing. Don't stop what you're doing. And for him to really speak on that during our conversation, and again, that wasn't what was expected. Like that, I was appreciative of that, but to know that this is somebody whom I feel like they're doing what they're doing, they're breaking barriers, and for them to really see what I'm doing and really have so much respect for it and what I'm putting out, I appreciate that. And George is very much in the same way. George is someone, Zahara, who George has been such a cool individual to get to know over the years. And that was really like my first time speaking with him as well, and learning about his background, learning about the adversity. But he is just he's an eclectic guy, but he's such a positive guy. And again, the fact that someone whom I see in this realm, especially with what I feel like what he's done with his brand, and for me, like the beautiful fragrances that his company produces, the fact that he early on really understood he didn't like social media, but he liked talking to people on Instagram because they were real. They gave real opinions. They were passionate about it. They weren't these, hoity toity reviewers. Like, these are real people who just love what they did and they love the art of it. And the fact that he's watched me grow since 2018 with what I've been doing, whether it's fragrances or even now more so the interviewing content and everything, for him to say, like, you and what you do embody everything that my brand is about. Like, that was something that really struck home to me, and I really appreciated that. So for me, I guess a lot of it is these people who I look up to see what I'm doing and like, no, this is exactly what you should be doing. This is making a difference. Like, I appreciate that. And that gives me even more fuel to keep going. I even had a dialogue with Carmela the other day, just about some things that happened this weekend. And even she says, like, you know what? I saw your stuff before I even talked to you, but I didn't even realize it. Like, you really make good content, and like the message you put out is really cool. And even from those I interview, because when I speak with the PR person, she's just like, my clients really appreciate the interviews that you have with them. Like, they are really appreciative of the sort of how you treat them, the sort of light you put them in. And that right there, from the individual conversations to the sort of macro and the reception, like that really keeps me going, because I appreciate that people understand what I'm trying to do with the interviews that I have. And that just gives me the fire to create more. Then also, kind of a sidetrack, working with good people as well, interfacing with good people. I've had the good fortune of, even though we haven't talked that often, dialoguing with you over years, seeing what you do, taking inspiration from you, working with Patrick and some of the other people that, I have been fortunate to meet a lot of people who make good content and be able to learn from them as well.
Really? My stuff that I put out there actually helped you out and do something for on your end?
Yeah.
Really?
I always, you have a passion when you're talking to people. And for me, the people that I watch, that I love watching, they have a passion for what they're talking about. And I think really, we talked, and then we interfaced before about Slumber Party Massacre a couple years ago. But
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But when I saw you had James Storm, I was like, oh, I need to
Yeah.
watch this. And because I'm a big wrestling fan.
Yeah.
At that time, I think he was either just out of NWA. I loved him in TNA, loved him in NWA. And I really started keeping up with you after that. And
I see.
again, your style, and more importantly, your passion. I think that's something that sometimes is missing when people do these sort of things. The passion isn't there. And the fact that when you go into these interviews, there's a definite passion that you have for who you're talking to and what you're talking about. Let me go back to, say, some of the adult stars. And when I see people who have interviews with them, there's a passion maybe for the business. There's a passion that those interviewers have for understanding what goes on in business. But I can't say those people always have a passion for who they're talking to. Not saying they don't like them,
I
but
see what you're saying better now.
It's a way of having more understanding about what it is they go through in the business, not so much of who they're actually speaking to. And again, you, Patrick, and a few others, like, there is a definite, for instance, one of the guys local here, I think it's somewhat national, Kevin McCarthy, he does film reviews here for Channel 5 in the DC area. I love him. I love his interview style because he is such a movie nerd and he loves cinema, and his questions are so thoughtful, and they come from a passion he has for movies in general, and then to the general excitement that he has for every single star that he's sitting across from. I love that. It's so engaging. He is another one of those people who I look and say, that's what I want to be like when I'm here. Like, I want to have that passion. I want to have that thoughtfulness. I want to be able to convey that level of excitement to an audience. So that's why I take all that from it. So all of those things really keep me moving forward.
I appreciate the kind words. I'm actually flattered, to be honest with you. But so there's something that, since we talked about the impact that these conversations have had on you, and how it more or less kind of just driven you further to continue on with this here. What do you think would have happened though if those conversations you've had with both Sean and George, and they told you, let's say they didn't give you the response that they just gave you after the conversation, where they've noticed what you've done, they've complimented your work, and they're telling you, keep doing this, you're doing really good, and just keep working on it, etc. And then Carmela coming out to you and saying, I saw what you've done before, I love what you do. And then their PR firms from the adult stars are telling you the same thing, like, hey, my client likes you a lot, they respect what you're doing, and so on. If you were not getting any of that at all, and I'm not saying they're going to say to you that you're not good, it's not that, but if you were not receiving that response at all, they're just simply say they appreciate your time, thank you very much, and if you want to reach out, just reach out to me here, and then we'll see what their schedule like. If it's kind of like just more or less a standardized professionalism that they would have, if it was just that, none of those compliments, do you think that you probably would have still had the same drive that they've more or less, I'm not saying rekindled for you, but just amped it up for you further if you've never heard that?
I would still have a drive.
Right. What happens if you get a negative response? Like, you're not very good, that was a boring conversation. What do you think you would have done then?
It would just make me want to do it better next time.
Okay.
This is one of the things about, if I did receive something like that, everybody's different,
right?
And you vibe with people differently,
right?
And some people are going to be receptive and some people are not. So if it doesn't go that well, it doesn't go that well. That doesn't mean the next interview is going to be the same. And that's the way I've always looked at it. But I would continue to, even without those compliments, which I'm very appreciative of, this is something I believe in. And let me explain. So let me go back to 2009. 2009 was the creation of Webster Style. It came from the fact that I'm someone who I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I am from the inner city of Baltimore, is where I spent most of my life. People never ever think that that's where I'm from, because because of how I dress. Two, most of the time, except for like saying two or do or something like that, people don't pick up that that's where I'm originally from. And for me, back in 2009, I was at a point where I wouldn't say it was an odd man out, but I knew too many men like me, and they weren't being highlighted in mass media. And again, it was just a little blog then, but my whole point was, I'm tired of reading GQ. I'm tired of reading Details. I'm tired of reading Esquire and seeing very little people that look like me. Men look like me, whether they're Black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever. Like, at that time, you did not see many men in those magazines that were men of color. So for me, and then on the flip side of that, when I did see men of color, particularly Black men, it was in sort of urban oriented magazines. I think at the time it was like King, and I forget the other one that was out back then. And like, that was never who I was. Like, never. I was never, that sort of style never appealed to me. So I believe I think it was a friend of my wife's. And I was talking to him about it, and he was just like, you should write about it. So I ended up taking the advice. I had a friend of mine who I've known for years, who we worked together for a while after grad school. And he always wore bow ties. And he was like, it fits your style, you should wear one, yada yada. I'm like, nah, I really went like, nah, okay, cool. About 2 years later, so it was like 2009, I'm in the mall one day down here, and I just opt to buy a bow tie. And that experience of learning and then wearing the bow tie became the very first post on Webster Style. or Webster Style magazine at the time. So the whole, and before the tagline was the new definition of the urban gentleman, because I was looking at it as a way to
Oh,
directly
I
sort
see
of
what you're saying. Yeah.
combat that sort of what a urban male of color is supposed to look like. And the whole idea was it wouldn't be just me, it would be a bunch of guys like me writing about various things. So at some points I had other guys write stuff about style, tech, sporadically. Nobody was getting paid, with something we was doing for fun. But the point is, I'm very much cognizant of the image of what I want to project, and not saying this isn't who I am, because anybody I tell you this is who I am every day. So I am Webster Style, but I'm very cognizant of the image. And the image and the projection has always been important to me to combat stereotypes, combat what people think of not just men of color, but men in general. And that's why I say that even without those, I would still be going forward, because, at least in my mind, I am happy with the extension and growth of the platform in the past 2 years. And I feel like that even if I hadn't gotten those accolades, I feel like the image I'm presenting is something that is beneficial to someone, whether I hear from them or not. Somebody's watching it, somebody's getting a benefit, whether it is a fragrance review, whether I'm talking about gaming. The fact that they're seeing me do it, I know full well that somebody's going to see that and be inspired by that.
So I want to go back to something you had said about
Mm.
what the initial tagline was. If you don't mind repeating it again, because
Sure.
there's a specific question I want to ask.
The new definition of the urban male. That's
Okay.
what the original tagline was.
So now you have this current tagline on your background right now,
Yes.
but what made you decide to more or less drop what you previously had before to what it is now? And there's a reason why I asked that question, because I'm wondering if there maybe is some sort of negative connotation that came from that maybe you would have dropped it, or if it was just something that, this I want to change it for whatever those reasons may be.
Okay. No, the change really came from as I expanded. Um, and my viewpoint wasn't just urban, it was just being a gentleman, being a good man in my perspective. And as it grew, as I wrote, as I myself got into different things and wanted to express different things, it was the stereotype, or combating the stereotype of what a gentleman was and is. And yes, it can be the dress, the bow ties, the fragrances, but what makes up a man is a lot more than that. And that's where that change happened, where it wasn't just about a new definition, it was about redefining the standard. And that's where the new tagline came from, redefining the lifestyle of a gentleman, because it's about how you live your life, not just being a gentleman. It's about how you live your life as a gentleman. So, like, I read comics, I'm into sci-fi, I'm a nerd, I play video games, I write poetry, I talk about political issues at times, and I'm into style and fashion. So all of those encompass me. And I look at my friends, I look at people that I've known for 20 plus years, and while all of them aren't that's part of all of who they are.
Right. Well, so I was asking about that because there was an interview that I came across a while back. Zoe Kravitz had done an interview. This is around a time, I think, after or before the release of the Batman, when it came out.
Right.
And so I was going back to the tagline, because as soon as you said what the previous tagline was, that question popped in my head because of what she had pointed out before. What she had said was that back in, I think, 2011. Yeah, I think it was 2011. Yeah, because Batman. The Dark Knight Rises came out in 12, but she had auditioned for Catwoman that Anne Hathaway got. Now, this is two things I've noticed from reading that interview was that she had said that during the audition process, whoever the casting director was, or whoever producers, whoever it was that had said this here, made her feel uncomfortable when they were telling her that you're too urban for the part. Now, I remembered a previous EPK that I came across through the movie Bullet to the Head, which is with Sylvester Stallone and
Right.
Jason Momoa.
Right.
Joel Silver, I'm sure you know who he is, but he's the guy that
Yes.
produced the Lethal Weapon movies and all those films.
Matrix and all that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. He had said something in that interview that I didn't notice before. I just kind of took it on face value, didn't think much of it. But hearing what Zoe had to say about that, and then hearing what Joel said about, because they had cast Sung Kang from Fast and Furious in that film, and he said, we want to bring someone who was urban, and they brought in an Asian man, but they used the term urban. So when I hear that now, especially from the interview with Zoe, to me, to her, it had a negative connotation. And I'm wondering, does that term now? It's not a big thing now. People are saying it's a controversial word, but I'm wondering though if I was wondering. I meant to say that if you had changed it for those reasons, considering that you said that I've come from the inner cities of Baltimore, and there's a certain image that people will have. And if you say urban, and I'm reading about what Zoe had to say, if all that kind of intertwined for those reasons why you may have changed it. That's really the reason why I was asking. But I'm certainly not trying to bring any sort of controversy behind why you made the changes there. But I was wondering if, me sharing that now, does your perception change a little bit about the use of the word? How, if someone were to say urban, does it have a negative connotation behind what urban even means in the first place? Because urban can really be a positive thing too. Right. But hear what Zoe had to say, because somebody said you're too urban for the part, and yet 10 years later she's in a movie where she got the part for the exact role that she auditioned for 10 years before, and apparently she's urban enough now, if you will.
Right. I will say this: when it came to Webster, I never thought about urban in that context. Never. However, I say that, and I've had many conversations about urban being used as a coded word for black.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to media.
Too.
Yeah. Or hood, or but it's weird. Like you mentioned, like I literally never thought about it in context of Webster Style, but I've had many conversations and lamented so much when, especially with Hollywood and people calling films targeted toward African American population, particularly, but even Latino populations, as urban films. I was like, not all black people, Latino people, whatever, are urban. If it's urban, if it's set in the city, it's by its very definition an urban film. That's a sort of city, sort of, but that shouldn't be a connotation for the audience and or who the actors are and what their ethnicity is. But yeah, I have, personally speaking, in that context, always had an issue with how it was used. But oddly enough, I never thought about it when it came to Webster Style.
Okay.
Like, yeah, the name change was literally just an evolution of what I did with the platform and my own perspective.
Have you ever thought about, look, with the guests you bring on your show, you said you talk about politics. I'm not saying you've that you are intending on ever bringing it to your show, but have you ever thought about, like tackling a subject matter that you think is really interesting to talk about, whether it be controversial or not, but you want to delve into it because you want to get a perspective from somebody else's point of view, whether they agree with you or not, whether it's a similar perspective or not, but you want to capture that conversation because you just want to you want to see I guess you want people to see either an opposing side or sides are just getting to know each other, and then they're delving into a matter that would be considered too controversial, but yet it makes for an interesting conversation without having to escalate to people arguing for that matter. Like, you ever consider doing something like that outside of more or less the theme of the show, if you will?
I haven't yet. Personally speaking, I have I wasn't shied away from. I haven't found the subject matter that I want to present in that way yet. I think there are some things I've talked about personally that I would never talk about online,
Yeah.
just because. Not saying I wouldn't want to share my viewpoints. I feel as though that takes away from the brand. I put it that way, and takes away the sort of presentation that I have here. Um, Personally speaking, I do think that there's definitely room for that to happen on the platform. I think it would, for me, it would be twofold. It would be the right topic
Right.
and the right guest.
But what happens if it's spontaneous though for you? Like if it was a situation where it naturally came about and you're talking to someone that's not in that field, but they have opinions in the matter and it just came out organically. Do you think you'd be comfortable to do it under those circumstances?
Yeah, I feel as though that I am well versed enough to be diplomatic in my responses and to adequately address. Like, I'll give you a case in point. Now,
Okay.
I have guested on Ren's Red Room over on the Head Nerds in Charge channel twice, and actually, I did an interview with her yesterday, which unfortunately her video didn't come through. I'm going to redo it, but we ended up getting, like, the conversation just went into talking about poly relationships. And part of that is based on the fact that when I was on her show, she had a gentleman who was a sensual dominance and that the whole lifestyle thing. And then on the other hand, I am just at Exotica and a lot of people in lifestyle and this and that. And so that kind of sparked a conversation from there. And I mean, we both made our opinions known on the subject, not saying either one we think that it's good or bad or anything like that. And I'll, like, it'll be released. I think since the video was out, I'll release it as an audio form. So it's not like something I'm not going to share with the world. But I think that, like, that was one of those things where I think we both spoke about the subject in a way based on our own experiences and our own observations, not to cast judgment, or also give our own personal opinions about, okay, is this something that's beneficial? Is this something that will work in the long term for people? You know, which may be controversial to some people, but that's where the conversation went to. And I think that the conversation we had were two adults who totally understood that we were speaking on the internet for everybody to hear, and we made sure that we were eloquent, direct, and as respectful as possible to the subject matter.
Have you ever talked to somebody privately that said something that whether you agree with them or not, but you appreciated where the conversation went, but you know that the subject matter cannot be discussed more or less publicly in this capacity because you understand that even if you're not the one that may agree with whatever they would believe in, whether it be politics or whatever the case may be, but it makes for a great conversation because you have two people's perspectives
Oh,
about what they
yes.
look. But when you think about it, though, do you think that can serve? I'm not saying it's a detriment, but more or
Mhm.
less like an opportunity that these conversations happen in real life. We need to see more of this, and if we can do it in this capacity, that should be that should be something that is worth listening to or worth checking out without hurting your brand or their brand or whatever thing they're part of here. And because I don't think that I personally don't believe that people are at a point right now. Well, I think it's always been this way. I don't think it's any different now. I don't think I remember seeing this as a kid. And I'm like, it's still the same problems that is going on today about how people project their opinions. But I don't think that people have been very educated enough. I think it's the best way I could describe it to learn to separate their personal investment from someone else's opinion
Right.
and
Oh, I
learning
agree.
to just listen to it objectively rather than having to learn to, say, I don't agree with you, I'm going to cancel you. I don't agree with you, so you should be fired. Like it's just something about that really bothers me. But when you have them in private, you realize that this is actually really good. And you never argued with me. In fact, you were really good with me. You didn't agree with me. I didn't agree with you, but we had a great conversation. Would have loved to share this with everybody else.
Yeah, I've had that personally. I've definitely had those conversations where, like, with the same young lady, we were just having a dialogue about certainly not so much political, but more relationship stuff. And I just, said, look, this is my experience. I totally disagree with what we posted in your perspective. Because my experience, my 25-year experience of being involved with women intimately says something completely different than what the link you posted, as well as your opinion. But I respectfully disagree with you, but I understand your opinion. And she's like, I totally understand where you're coming from and why you feel that way. And there was no like blows or, people getting upset. It's like, I respect people's opinions and experiences. I wouldn't say especially, but when they're based in knowledge,
yeah,
and understanding, and also you're not speaking to where you are right and the other person is wrong because you feel this way about something. I can't sit here and say, you know what, she's wrong with agreeing with the post. I can't say that. She's a what 20, late 20, early 30-year-old woman who has her own life experiences, has her own dealings with the opposite sex that informs her to say something. She's also has her own personality traits that dictate to do something in relationships and want something in relationships. I'm a 45-year-old man who's been married 16 years, who has, run the gamut of different situations in my marriage and in relationships before. And all of those have influenced me in my opinion based on the subject matter we were talking about. So, and then all of the men in my life whom I've spoken to about this very issue have had the exact same experiences that I have. So that informs my opinion. That informs, hey, no, I think this is completely wrong. And I've lived this, and so many other men in my life have lived this. But I can't sit here and say, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. No, that's not true. It's like, who am I to say that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think that we in general have discourses like, well, no, we don't respect each other's opinion enough and viewpoint enough to have genuine discourse. And like I have been married 16 years. My wife and I don't see eye to eye all the time.
Yeah.
And I will not lie to you and say that for both of us, it was a learning process to find a way to agree to disagree.
And find a middle
Because,
ground.
yeah, to find a middle ground or just respect each other's opinion on something. When it comes to us together, whether our household, whether life in general, just to respect the other person enough to say, okay, I understand why you feel this way. That's not how I feel, but that doesn't invalidate how you feel about it or your viewpoint on it. And I think that when we see these conversations, especially online, that is not present.
Yeah. But do you think though that when you, I'm not saying that this is something that needs to happen. It's really kind of more like it's ebb and flow. If it comes naturally, if it's something that's important to talk about, I'm sure people will have the way about wanting to go about it. But when you, so for example, like if you see somebody that you're a fan of,
right,
and if you're watching, you've answered this question for me, but I think I'm just going to go more in depth to see if I can get more out of you on this one. But if you listen to them talk about whether it's a sensitive topic like, say, religion, and they say something that you flat out disagree with, do you think I've come to a point where you are willing to listen to the whole thing, or what you've listened to the point as far as how far you've made it into it? I've got the gist of it. I'm not going to go any further. Because I always wonder if people have when they disagree with somebody, if they have a certain limitation about how far they'll listen to it, or if they're willing to listen to it the entirety, given the time, of course, to get a full-fledged opinion about, okay, I get it. My perspective still isn't the same. It's still the same, but it makes more sense why they come out this way. But I'm still a fan of them. And despite the fact that I hugely disagree with them, that doesn't taint my point of view of their said work that I'm massive fans of.
Oh no, I have to listen. One of the things that I have learned from the internet specifically It says sound bites never are exactly the way that you think they sound when you hear the full context of what someone said. And so many things are distorted now because people take sound bites and don't play the full comments for someone. So no, I try my best to listen to everything that this, and there are very few occasions where I just got cut off. Like I just can't, because it's like utter garbage. Like I don't agree with anything this person is saying. That doesn't happen often. It's probably happened a couple times, but not often. I like to listen because there's so many things when it comes to communication where, and I'll say, I'm accusing it. I'll say this, like I will speak and I'll be talking. And some people go kind of a roundabout way of getting to that point. And if you don't allow them to finish speaking, you cut them off. You only get the point that kind of sticks to you and you take it a certain way, but that's not even what they were talking about.
Yeah.
They were using that to illustrate something, get to a bigger point. But because what they started saying, that triggered you in some way, and you shut down and you took what they said as just that without listening to the entire idea, you do a disservice to them, but you more so do a disservice to yourself as being someone who is supposed to be there to listen, to understand, and to process information. So me personally, I do my best to sit and listen. If they're saying something I don't necessarily agree with, let me listen to hear everything. I may not agree with you, but I may have a better understanding of your point of view after it's said and done. And I'll say this, like, okay, talk about controversial topics. The whole hullabaloo with J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Whether I agree or disagree with what she says, I listen and I read her whole statement. I've listened to what she said. So again, not saying agree or disagree, but I understand her perspective and where she's coming from and why she feels that way. And I am not living in her shoes. I am not a woman. I am not dealing with these sort of societal shifts that are going on. I have no idea how I would feel in that situation. But I'm not going to sit here and take a soundbite or take what somebody says she said and base my opinion on that. I'm not even going to base my opinion on what she said as far as like the Harry Potter films and all that stuff. I was like, she has a right to her opinion. She has a right to her feelings and her perception. Whether I agree with it or not, I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, no, I'm not going to buy anything Harry Potter or this and that, because I'm like, it's kind of too late for that. That Pandora's box is open, personally speaking. But it is about listening to people and not just cutting them off because you don't agree with what they say. There's some, when people just heinously like, dude, you were utterly disgusting with what you say and just are so bigoted and hateful and yet okay, then we cut them off. But in my opinion, a lot of these things that were said, J.K. Rowling as my own personal opinion, I feel like a lot of it is interpretation.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is internalizing what they said instead of actually listening to what they said and processing what they said and why they said it. And I think that and I see this in real life all the time, a lot of it is not what someone actually said, is how people internalize what they said, how it made them feel. And the feelings trump the words that was said in somebody's point of view and somebody's rationale behind it. And that's what get people, in many respects, not all the time, but in my opinion, that's what get people up in arms. So when we start to actually listen and respect people for what they have to say, case in point, get more conservative. What's his name? Ben Shapiro. Assembly's Ben Shapiro. I forget I'll use an example. I've watched
Jordan
him
Peterson, those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't say I agree with everything he says.
Yeah.
Or any of them say, but I understand the points that they make at times. I understand their perspective and why they came to their conclusions and can respect them on that. Well, the perception is their opinions are not the same as mine. They still are thought out. They're still very much based in fact. They are still very much articulated in a way that I can sit there and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with you, but I respect you saying it in your opinion, and I would agree to disagree with you on this in this case. But I'm not going to say, oh, he's a hate monger and oh, he's this and this. It's like, no, just listen to what he has to say. Don't take a soundbite. I tell you the truth. If I had just listened to sound bites again from like Ben Shapiro over the years and listened to what people said about him, I would think he's this hateful Jewish guy who is against minorities and this and that. But the fact that I've actually listened to him talk about things and listened to his perspective on society and this and that, I was like, okay, I understand where this dude is coming from. I still don't agree with him in many respects. And
Yeah.
we do agree sometimes, him, Candace Owen, the whole ilk of the Daily Wire.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to we've lost that respectfulness of one another when it comes to our dialogue, in my opinion. And going back to the original point, I think that the platform could be used for that. For me personally, I think that it has to be the right topic, and a topic that I really want to dive into. And I felt like I could present in a respectful way to foster a genuine dialogue. As of right now, like I have no idea what topic that would be. And honestly, in my mind, I would want it to be something that nobody's talking about, because I don't want it to be every other podcast on politics or relationships or this or that. I try to do things somewhat differently just to carve out my own niche. So that's another aspect of that as well. Like it would really have to be the right conversation for me to want to do something, at least on my platform. I have no issue joining other people in conversation on their platform. But as far as my platform is concerned, it would have to be the right one to offer that content, because I really want to be different than what most people are doing.
What's your opinion on the I'm going to say oversaturation, because I've noticed it a lot. There's a lot more shows, like we talked before about Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, and there's a few other ones as well too that I've come across as well, that they have hosts of this sort, where be it politics, relationships, whatever the case may be, and that they are discussing with people of more or less the opposing opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and they have like a debate, or they have a conversation. And I say that in quotes because it doesn't seem like a conversation to me, but it's more like I remember I came across a clip one time, well, actually several times I should say, because there's more than one that I came across, but a bunch of guys are talking to women who have OnlyFans, or
Mm-hmm.
what's your body count and things of that nature. And then they're saying that, men like these things and men are this and this and that, and like, but it's clearly them projecting their point of view. But for me, I've noticed that, you know, 10 years ago, this stuff never really existed. Now, I'm sure the conversations have always existed before. There's
Right.
no doubt about that. Because of this platform now, people doing podcasts, and these are not like just like, not to say my shit is shabby, but like, it's not like here's a computer, and it's a little bit more elaborate, a little high end type stuff, and they bring in guests that are well versed in their respective field, but yet they're able to talk about their personal opinions on the subject matter, that whatever that may be. But it's an ongoing thing now that I've noticed. It's constantly growing, and then they bring in those various guests on the show that has nothing to do with that at all, because it's an open conversation, and that becomes the topic of that episode, if you will.
Right.
So when you see that for yourself, like, do you because I personally like to stick with like films, and I
Mm-hmm.
like to listen to other conversations that's outside of that as well. But I've noticed lately now that it's a lot of, to me, it seems like a lot of projection about what is the standard, rather
Yes.
than, I don't, like how you said before, I don't agree with it, but I get their point of view. Because even if you have an opinion on the matter, yeah, but you're still wrong, and you have a elongated conversation. But I also noticed too,
Right.
there's a panel of people, and the panel of people can only say so much, and then someone else interject, like how you pointed out before, and it becomes a convoluted mess where I think people who are watching this now at a younger age, they will see that as being the standard, and they will
Right.
be accustomed to that. And then as they get older, that's the way it's got to be. And I'm like, I used to think that way, not about that, but I'm just saying about how the format works. And then I
Mhm.
figured out for myself that it doesn't need to be that way. And I'm sure you figured out for yourself as well too. But going back to the question, like what's your thoughts on that now when you start to see more of that? Because you have a perception about gentlemanness and
Mhm.
the various things that more or less make up a man, a relationship to your, from your standpoint. But you're seeing all this. Do you feel like it's kind of tainted in a lot of way from your perspective, or do you feel like this is a good starting point and we'll see how it grows from there?
It was a good starting point 3 years ago when it really started to pop off. And I say that because I think with Fresh and Fit, when they were first started, I watched them. Um, Kevin Sims, I would never lump him into that because I've always felt like what he did was different and the conversation was different with who he addressed. But now you have what like SOS, like a lot of stuff still comes up on my feed. But like what SOS cast, whatever has gotten really big and popular. Um, and I will say this when, and I don't know if Fresh and Fit were like the first ones to do it, but when they started doing it like in 2020 or 2019, whenever it happened, it was different. And I felt like at the time, okay, we can have some real conversations. Now I think it's a farce of what it was because you're hearing like I'm hearing these dudes talk about the same thing talked about 3 years ago. Like there's no sort of changes. Like there's no growth in them as men, personally speaking. Like from a standpoint of relationships and how they view things. And then you are literally getting the same sort of cookie cutter type of woman on the show for the most part, who's going to have the same mentality. So there's no real conversation. Like you said, it's very much about projection. It is very much about telling them, well, what is it? Only like 10% of the men in the country make $100,000
Yeah.
and you want to be 6'5", this and that. Like, so you're dealing with like 0.22% of the population, which is true, or whatever it is. But how many times can you say that? How many times can you regurgitate that? How many times can you say the same talking points over and over again? Um, where's the honest discussion? Where's the earnest discussion about these sort of topics? Okay, why are we shifting to it that way? Why is this quote unquote perceived dynamic between men and women different than maybe what it was when our grandparents? Why is it that so many women feel as though 100K is what you have to make, even though most people, let alone most men in America, don't make that in a year? Those are the sort of questions we should have to examine the root of the problem, because there's a disconnect, which these shows highlight, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, younger people that are coming up, they're seen as the standard when really these individuals, both the males and the females on these shows, are a subset of a subset of a subset. They just have a platform and they're yelling the loudest. The conversations that we have about these things. And again, I always say when I have these conversations with individuals, I know whether they're younger or female, like, look, I've been married 16 years. I have no idea what it's like to date anybody. Like, I have no idea what it's like, but I know that when I was dating, we never have conversations like, oh, you have to make this much. Oh, you have to do this. It's like none of these conversations happened in whether when I was dating my wife, whether when I was dating anybody else before my wife, as far as there was no requirement, no woman said, oh, you just got out of grad school, you're making 35K, I can't date you. I never heard that in my life.
But do you think though that like because what's really interesting for me, and I know for a fact you've seen this before, is that what we see on camera, on these various platforms, whether it be social media, YouTube, or use some televised program, where there's a conversation that takes place about those particular subject matters there. But yet, I've noticed as well that and there's a lot of people like, I'm not gonna say who exactly, but the whole the vaccine thing, where when COVID it was a big thing at that time, the vaccine was a controversial subject matter. You have to get it, or if you don't get it, it's a bunch of stuff. There have been some people that I saw that I've spoke with directly that were very much against getting the vaccine for all these reasons that we've heard before.
Right.
And not even joking, 3 months later, yeah, I got the vaccine because I had to go to this country and they would not let me out until I get the, and so I had to get it. But please don't tell anybody. And I'm like, you fucking serious? Like after all this, you want to keep this a secret? You do know that in time, no one's gonna care, and
Exactly.
no one's gonna really think of this as as an issue because um this stuff does eventually take time to find a footing. But the fact of the matter is that there's this whole stink about this thing that everyone was making, but when you talk to them personally, those point of views weren't consistent.
Right.
So, but I'm seeing a lot of those same issues that are coming up, and it's the same topic as you mentioned before. But I can almost guarantee 95% of those people that are on those platforms, whether they are the host or the guest, they may not have the same point of view as they did on the episode or the show that they were on. And I'm wondering for yourself that do you think that in the long term that will break apart where people will notice that? Because it's like the entertainment industry where people talk about the film that this movie was fantastic. I love this movie. And then you find out the movie was not that good. There was problems behind the scenes. And it's become so more exposed now that you really can't hide those things anymore because it's talked about openly to some degree. Even when the people are promoting the movie, yeah, I didn't get along with the director, but we made a good movie though. That's an honest response, but they're promoting the film. They're not necessarily promoting the director who had a shitty day on set that treated them like shit that day. So it's a very fine line that I've noticed, but people are approaching these things, but in private, it's completely different in some cases, in most cases, I would say. But do you think in the long term that will sustain itself to the point where once the bullshit has been revealed, what's the next bullshit they can come up with next?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's more so of that. What's the next BS they can come up with next? Because I think while it seems like there may be more shows, there's like one, like okay, like the whatever show, whatever it is, that kind of popped up. Like the clips of that popped up out of the blue, and that kind of supplanted where the other, it show was. It spoke about that content, had that. There's always something that's supplanting it. But I think honestly, and I'm even going from my own personal experience, that sort of content, that rhetoric dies. Like you get tired of it.
Yeah.
If you are actually looking at this objectively and realistically, as far as the world works, I'm not saying there's any shred of truth in anything that the conversation they have. However, you can only have the same conversation so many times.
Right.
And if you have the same sort of conversation just with different people in every show, that gets tiring and gets boring and people tune out. And yes, you could probably find new viewers because there's a common denominator that everybody kind of gravitates to. But in reference to people being exposed to some degree, yes, some people do and have been exposed and people falling off because of that. They're losing their credibility as they should. But this is the one thing about the internet that I feel the most. There is such a point of view that even if you expose somebody, that they can go on and claim that is not right and claim that is fake and make all these claims. And there's such a large subset that will believe them because they don't want to believe that this person isn't what they say they are. They will continue to follow them. And I'm not saying that's not something that we have had before in human history, right. But I feel like with the internet society we live in now, where it's really all smoke and mirrors to begin with,
yeah,
it is very easy for people to continue to say their message even when they've been shown that this is not the case. And there are still people who want to believe them because they put so much into them. That is a scary part for me because that particular subject matter in general, when I'm sitting there thinking, I understand why there are men that feel this way. I understand why there are women that feel the way they feel, regardless if I feel like personally that, okay, dude, there's so much more in life than what you're doing right now. And this is going to have drastic repercussions on your life. And you're young and dumb and you don't get it. And this is coming from a 46-year-old man who is very glad that there wasn't everybody to have a cell phone when he was 21. So I think of that from the context of age and wisdom and experience, and being grateful that I didn't grow up in a time where everybody had a camera phone to record my every action, that I could put something on the internet and it lives forever, or somebody does something by accident and it's there. Like, I didn't have to grow up in that time. So for me, I would say that out of a place of, hey, I've seen it happen. I've talked to people who have had their lives ruined because of mistakes they made on the internet. I've been in higher education before, so I've had to talk to students about, hey, jobs are looking at social media profiles. They're looking at this. They're looking at that. They're looking at this. And the internet is forever. And to not have any meaningful dialogues, or when there is something meaningful, to have people who are so steadfast in what their message is, without really thinking, I didn't think about it that way. You're right. That may not be the case all the time, or there may be somebody who would accept this, and this may not be a deal breaker in the day and age that we live in. Those conversations never happen. That point of understanding never happens. And you know what these shows remind me of now? Morton Downey Jr.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
The shock value of it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Entertain. For all y'all probably under 30, look that up. Probably under 30, look that up. But the shock value.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Flamed out. His talk show flamed out, I think, 2 years or whatever. It was like really high, and then it just crashed. And I think that you're going to see a lot of these platforms crash because they offer very little substance. When you really think about it, some of them diversify, but the main core, there's very little substance is offered. It's all the same talking points, which, look, statistics are statistics. No matter how you flush them, they're going to say the same thing. If you are someone, if I'm a lady, I'm 25 and I want a man, my dream guy is 6'5", making $200,000 a year. Yes, your chances of meeting that person is 6'5", 200,000 a year, Latino or Black, and living in a major metropolitan area you're in, and not married, and no kids. You have a very small chance of finding that person.
Yeah, it's like, good luck with that.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's just the reality of it. And again, you can want what you want, and same thing with men. Like, you can want what you want, but the statistics are not on your side in that regard. But how many times can you say that? How many times can you have that conversation with people? And I think with that sector, that's where, for me, the problem lies. And it really highlights the fact that they're not doing it to have a real conversation. They're doing it for the sensationalization of it and for the clicks and the views and the super chats. It's not really about real conversation about these subject matters, because you're having the same conversations you had back in 2020.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is more, because I always wonder too if some of the guys or women that do these shows that, like, I'm not saying that they're skewed as far as their perspective. I'm not certainly implying that, but I'm wondering, like, if, because they've been so steadfast on, I've seen how these people go about the subject matter, and they never offer anything with substance. It's always just, very empty calories of a conversation, or their version of a conversation. And then they're consistent with their point of view because they have a point, if you will. I look at nowadays as the internet, especially with social media, as candy, like kids eating candy. They're just consuming so much because there's no discipline about, um, you know, keep it a level head about the whole thing. Because I remember as a kid, I'm sure you guys will too. Bag of candies, man. If I could get away with it, I would eat it in a heartbeat. And then I felt the consequences after the fact in the bathroom. So it's one of those situations where the consequences now aren't as impactful for certain people because they can literally get away with it and never be exposed, but they can expose someone else. It's a very weird situation to see now. Everyone's accusing everybody, but the accused can't hide from the accusers. That's a weird thing.
Right.
But I will say though that I kind of think about when I watch a movie, like we've seen enough superheroes in the last 20 years now where the plots are always the same.
Right.
But it's always about the angle that they're taking on the said plot, how they go about it. And then I think about conversation of what we were just what I brought before about relationship, whatever. I don't know how long that can sustain itself in the long term because you can always tell a story and you can change the story slightly different, add some different elements to it. But when you're talking about relationships, I don't think it's that complicated at all to begin with. When we talked about how you talked about, I meant to say about woman wants 6'5" guy, $200,000 a year, but not once did she ever mention, I just want a nice guy who's going to be really nice to me and just be kind to me when I'm not in the best mood because I need someone that's be patient so I can learn to be patient with them as well too.
Right.
Things like that I think is really important. One of the reasons why I did want to talk to you before is because I really love the way you approach the conversations. I really do. And I always felt like even during their trailer reactions you do, that one time that we did the NRW show, I remember at that moment, that was where it was really kind of more or less a turning point for me, where I remember the reaction that you gave about the Till trailer. And I was completely, because I didn't even know there was a Till movie that was coming out up to that point. And I remember when we were discussing about our opinions on what we thought of the trailer, the subject matter, and then you chimed in with what you thought as well too. I really liked what you had said, and I thought this is someone I would love to have a conversation. Let me see what they've done at that point. So I did. I had to take my sweet time because I was busy with a bunch of stuff as well too. But I've been meaning to reach out to you a long time ago. But what I was anticipating here is pretty much what I really wanted to get out of this conversation with you, which is just to start off more or less with the basics and then go off on a tangent from one subject to the next. And I really did appreciate that you have given me the time to converse with me and then be able to just kind of go off on a tangent here. I do agree with what Carmela had said about you and the other gentlemen as well, George and Sean, that you're really good at what you do. I really do believe that as well. But I also understand too that there's a growth in the process because from what I had seen before, when I did go back, I think it was a year ago, maybe a little less than that, I noticed right away from the first couple of videos to where you are with it now, it is literally night and day. So to me, that showed the progression you were making. So that means that you weren't too comfortable. You actually were expanding, and that's what I was noticing as well too. So that to me is made me much more interested to want to converse with you, apart from the things I've heard and the various things that you have done as well too. And the passion you have for fragrance. Honestly, I'm not a fragrance guy, but to hear you talk about it, that's quite interesting for me. So the fact that you got me interested to listen to you about it, even though personally I won't buy these things because it's just not my thing. But hearing that passion, as you mentioned before, that to me is what really appealed to me about if you can get me to do that, imagine what you can do with someone else as well too, that you could probably fully convert and say, yes, I will buy these things because Webster Style said this is good. This is a good product here. I'll go out of my way to buy it because he said it was really good. If you can do that, I think, the sky's the limit at this point here. So that's me giving me your props on that. But by the time this episode gets uploaded here on the channel, it's probably going to be a few weeks, but I'm just curious to see if there's anything else you want to add on to this here to more or less close out, but what else people can be expecting from you that they can anticipate to check out with whatever you're going to be doing, whether it be new episodes coming down the line here or anything in general that you would like to put out there for people to be on the lookout for.
Sure. I guess right now, at the time of this recording, I am editing all of my video and posting it from Exotica DC 2022. So you'll be seeing individual interviews coming out with various people. One of the ones I'm really excited about, and I'm mad because I didn't interview him in Jersey, was a gentleman, Pat Shan. He has a comic company, Space Between Comics, and they have a sort of a pulp imprint called Cheeky Comics, and they were there. So I was excited to finally stop and talk to him, and I hope to talk to him in depth soon, because it was just one of the things I find fascinating, at least when it comes to sex and sexuality. I hate sex in movies for the most part, because it always feels like it's there and not actually part of the story. It's like, oh, let's just have a sex scene. So I'm very interested in the creative process of writing something that's erotic in a comic form and actually having a good story as well. So I'm happy about, I got a chance to talk to him and made that connection. But yeah, you'll see the stuff from Exotica, a lot of stuff coming, frequent stuff, gaming stuff, diving back into Game Bites, as well as some watch stuff that's coming up soon too, over the next couple of weeks.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate, again, you giving me your time here. So for the cameras, I want to say thank you so much again for everything. And I would love to have this conversation, just continue on from there and just kind of go deeper into the rabbit hole, if you will.
I'm happy to come back anytime.
Oh, I appreciate that. So, but I also appreciate the compliments you gave me as well too. I honestly, that really caught me by surprise. I was actually kind of left speechless to hear you say that. So thank you for that. But again, for the cameras, thank you very much. And I'll make sure to have all the links in the description down below for people to check out. And I hope in time we can get back to this here again and pick up where we're left off here. So again, for the cameras, cheers to you.
Thank you.